behalf of MIM, I would like to extend a warm welcome to each and everyone here today. A warm welcome to our distinguished guests, Ms. Cynthia and Ms. Gita. So first of all, let me introduce the distinguished panelists to you. Our first distinguished panelist is Ms. Cynthia Gabriel. Give her a hand. She don't need any introduction. She's almost a brand name for human rights and anti-corruption in Malaysia. I think hardly anybody who don't know her in Malaysia. Yeah. She's a lawyer, okay? She's an executive director of C4. C4? Okay, then I leave it to you. Okay, and she was recently conferred the prestigious Democracy Award by the National Endowment for Democracy at the US Congress by none other than the Speaker of the US Congress, Mr. Paul Ryan. Okay, and our second equally distinguished panelist is Ms. Gita Rubasundram. She's a public accountant, a member of Malaysian Institute of Management. She has a master's in auditing and management information system from Schema Business School in France. And she's currently pursuing her PhD in governance, corruption, and sustainability. She has over 20 years of senior management experience gained from large multinational companies around Europe, Asia, and Middle East. She's currently also the Director of Governance and Sustainability with Achieve Cube Consultancy, based in Bahrain. Thank you very much, Ms. Gita. Welcome to the forum. Okay, without much ado, I would like to invite our first panelist, Ms. Cynthia Gabriel. She will be sharing with us on the topic, Empowering Women to Combat Corruption, Strategies for Change. Over to you, Ms. Cynthia.
Thank you very much to the MIM and to our moderator, and for the very elaborate introductions. Actually, we are here gathered for International Women's Day. I don't have a set of slides because what I wanted to do, and I'm a little bit disappointed, is that number one, to celebrate the achievement and empowerment of womankind everywhere, especially in leadership, in political leadership, in corporate leadership, etc. But one of the other things I wanted to do was to actually talk to our fellow male friends, and they're not here. So for those that are here, can we give them a round of applause? Because first point is International Women's Day must not only be celebrated by women alone. And it is time that men actually celebrate us, because we might be actually taking over in terms of knowledge, in terms of experience, in terms of multitasking, in terms of everything. So we celebrate each other. And I think that is my first point. It's cultural. And despite many advancements that we have made as women, there are still very stereotypical roles that we're expected to play. Now, I just wanted to also stress that despite us being, advancing in our careers and so on, I believe that there's still expectation that we should be the one to manage the kitchen, the grocery supplies, the children, the education of kids, and so on and so forth. And this is where I think one of the topics I want to get into today is, apart from culture, is how in Asia, whether we are in the Chinese culture, Malay culture, Indian culture, or those that come from indigenous tribes, this is where the challenge really lies, that we have been trying so much to assert the fact that there should be equality, there should be equity, but in real terms, it's also about sticking to the roles that we have been brought up to do. So we've talked about all this a lot, and I learned a lot from the panel just now about advancing growth, advancing leadership, advancing opportunity that comes to us. And I think that is really something that needs to be celebrated. But culturally, I prefer to actually have a cross-discussion between men and women about where we can actually go from here. And this is something that maybe the MIM might want to pick up. You might want to have an all-male session on International Women's Day, or something like that, or a joint session, because I think that's where the conversation needs to actually go. The most important thing is we're celebrating ourselves, but we also need our counterparts to celebrate us. Now, my second point is also about the culture of speaking up. And in the work that I do, which is a lot on anti-corruption, a lot on governance, a lot on trying to modify the system so that the laws can better serve us. One of the things that we are actually pushing and advocating, and now we have what we say kononia, or purportedly reformist government, that talks about anti-corruption and defeating corruption every day. But in most programming that we have, not just in Malaysia, but everywhere, we find that the rights of women or gender equality is often not institutionalized or entrenched in law reform around governance issues. And this is one of the important topics that I'm hoping the MIM will also take up in management practices and so on. So if we're actually talking about better governance, let's say in many policies, from procurement to actually trying to find ways to access better healthcare, what are we actually talking about? So in a lot of my own experience, and I'm sure many of the corporate leaders and friends that are present here today, we ask, what is the correlation between gender equality, women's rights, and anti-corruption work? And sometimes you think nothing, because corruption affects everybody. But first question, does it actually affect women disproportionately? And then we need to think, does it actually affect women disproportionately? Does it make it more difficult to access education, healthcare, or even getting a license to operate a business? Is it different? And I think this is where we need to start finding a cross-nexus between the rights, gender equality, and the fact that anti-corruption programming does not, in many instances, include the rights of women. And then it becomes more serious. I mean, things like sextortion, actually being harassed sexually in order to get what you want. So my point being, this is about power. And it essentially is about power. It's about access to power, and it's also about the abuse of power to allow women to progress. And I do hope that with a lot of the contemporary challenges today, we can actually take on these issues in a way that allows us to bring it up not just to the women's ministry, which we should, but to people who actually do programming, law reform around, say, whistleblower protection. This is a big thing. And this is something that my organization has been working very consistently with the law reform ministry. But we are also guilty of looking at it as law reform to develop a better speak-up culture in the country. So speak-up culture affects everyone. It is the culture of reprisal here. If you speak up, you must be crazy. And I found out the wrong way because I spoke up and I got intimidated, harassed, called to the police station 1,000 times, not 1,000, like 30 over times. But the point is, it comes with that. And there's a lot of culture of fear here. So it isn't just about developing a speak-up culture and hoping that people who notice a malpractice will actually use the system to do it. But now, in this whole law reform and speaking up in the workplace, one of the really exciting things really is that it is now being legalized. And the whole thing about reprisals must be addressed because you need to include confidentiality clauses. So if I report something about Gita, she will never know it's actually me that's reporting. And if the complaint actually leads to some kind of enforcement, then the whistleblower should actually be celebrated or given some kind of reward. But if I did it based on malicious intent, mala fide intent and all that, then I should be charged for defamation or punished in different ways. But the whole point here is that if I notice something wrong, what is the culture that we normally do? We just go and talk in kopitiams. That's it. And it just ends there. And if it comes to issues of abuse of power when it comes to women's rights, so for example, in order to actually move up the ranks, you might need to do worst case scenario, sexual favors and so on. But small amounts of sexual harassment may actually take place in order to actually move up the career. Can you report about it? Do you remember the case of Ain Husniza? That young girl who was reporting about the fact that her teacher was actually openly making rape jokes in class. But what happened to her? She was actually the one that was chastised and discriminated, and then there was even a lawsuit taken against her. So this is where we are today. And we're hoping that with this law reform, the culture of speaking up will be addressed, and it will be actually the impetus of us, law reformers and people who actually work towards better advocacy, to look at how to bring gender equality into programming around, say, a better whistleblower process that can include not just corrupt practices as you know it, bribery and so on, but what about abuse of power around sextortion, sexual harassment, and things that should incorporate gender equality into the programming. And then I did a little bit of research, and I realized that this is not just a Malaysia-only problem. At the United Nations level, when they develop all these conventions around corruption, so we have a very good convention called the UN Convention Against Corruption, and it is so detailed about what governments need to do, what private sector needs to do, and what civil society should be advocating. And there is a whole clause, or Article 13, which means civil society voices should be formally accepted into the process. So it's a big step, but there is no mention, absolutely no mention of, they say vulnerable populations, but there's no mention of gender equality in the programming. And so that's actually where I think we need to take this conversation, that if we actually want to look at talking about behavioral patterns, corporate culture and corporate behavior changing to accommodate women, we must also have frameworks that can offer that kind of empowerment, the rights, the equality of what we're actually talking about. So I'm not going to use that victim perspective anymore because I think we're there. We're there, but we need to insist that certain frameworks can actually benefit marginal populations. So now, there are many people who actually challenge this notion that women make better leaders because they are not so corrupt. And there is not enough data to even suggest that. That if you, say, take on the role of some kind of chairperson in a government-linked company, well, that maybe ensure better governance. Not enough data to even substantiate something like that. But this is something that we might want to actually look at. So what is the difference? Are you more likely to abuse power because we want something so badly we want to prove ourselves? Or what? So there's not enough data to actually suggest that women leaders are less corrupt. And of course, we are more than reminded that we have a lot of wives of political leaders who are more corrupt than anything else. And so where's the governance around that whole framework of trying to push forward the fact that we actually make good leaders and don't discount us because of our gender. So these are actually very stimulating conversations to have, and I was hoping you would organize something with more members of our other sex, the male population, so we can actually start discussing how to institutionalize gender equality currently. So in the civil society world that I'm familiar with, the women's groups operate very separately. The anti-corruption groups operate very separately. The sustainability groups operate really very separately. So for Geeta to want to do her PhD on anti-corruption, sustainability, equality, and all that, I think her PhD might be really of very big volumes because there's so many things to study in terms of nexus, in terms of where we are actually hoping to go. Now, another thing to look at is areas that we normally don't think of. For example, sport. We know a number of cases that former athletes have actually spoken about sexual harassment, and they couldn't speak up because it was their coach or it was their trainer. And so therein lies another issue of power. And whether you actually have to look at power issues to address anti-corruption, gender, and governance. And my one final point that I actually picked up along the way while practicing law is there was a recent case in the High Court where a judge, and it was a woman judge, ironically, very funny, actually ruled that for non-Malay marriages now, actually getting matrimonial assets is no longer a right. Because of the different roles that women play now, and that they have advanced so much in their careers, and there's equal opportunity to move up the corporate ladder, et cetera, that it no longer makes sense for divorce settlements for women to actually have that kind of right to matrimonial assets. And this is a very recent ruling in 2021 or 2022. And so it sparked a very interesting conversation in the law firm because I think we have like 70% women and 30% men. But the head of the legal firm is a man. And the founder is his father. So it's two men actually saying, yeah, it's a very progressive judgment, but we should not discount the fact that we should look at cultural, traditional roles that men are actually providers. So there is that extra responsibility for them to ensure that when a divorced woman is actually finally divorced, then the assets actually get divided, etc. So where is the argument? You know, we're talking about empowerment, we're talking about rights, we're talking about equality, but when it comes to issues like this, are we actually ready to say, yeah, no, that's not my asset, that's yours, okay, it's no longer automatic, but we actually have to argue for the situation, a case-by-case situation. If many issues, children, working opportunities, and so on and so forth. But this is where I just want to leave us, because I just wanted to leave us with many interesting developments in society today. And we should not, in my opinion, look at ourselves as victims anymore, but as ourselves as game changers, as movers, and sometimes even shakers in whatever that we do, in the locale that we are in. And not everyone should be frontline champions of whatever issue that will be hauled up by the police and all that. I'm not even getting there. I'm saying that whatever we do, we have to be the best. We have to speak up. We have to show that we're there because, not because we're just women, but because we are women and etc., etc. So I'd also like in the conversation if we can discuss a little bit about quota system, because I have some issues with that. And sometimes I find I am the only speaker in a very male panel, or on very difficult subject matters like on the economy and things that just go over our heads sometimes. And I'm there, and then they start giving me all these nice introductions about everything that I did. But at the back of my mind, I'm wondering whether, is it because they just needed to fulfill a quota to get a woman on the panel, or what? So, I mean, I understand the argument that quota system is needed to bump up the game, and so especially political issues. I had an opportunity to be a local council member in Petaling Jaya for a while. And sometimes in the middle of a conversation when I'm on the panel, then they will say, yeah, but I don't think we should get so emotional about residents' rights and all that. So, you know, it's like, is it because I'm a woman they're trying to say my point is emotional? But actually I wasn't even emotional. I was actually trying to assert a particular point. But this is where I think we need to close the ranks and show that we have just as good thought leadership as anybody else. Okay, so one final example as I close, and I know Titus is trying to tell me my time is up. In Indonesia, there is a movement. They are called I Am a Woman Against Corruption. And they are actually mostly corporate women leaders and women leaders everywhere. It's called the Indonesian acronym SPAC Indonesia. And the reason why they set this up is to empower more and more women, especially in the civil service and in, say, state-owned companies or even corporate culture, to actually empower more women to speak about better governance, to speak about law reform, to speak about economy that could affect gender issues, and also to speak about climate and climate concerns. Because one of the findings was in a tsunami, the World Bank found that there were more women victims, not because we couldn't run as fast, but that's because we had more clothes on us. And especially in a more Muslim context, where you also wear the hijab and you wear heavy clothes, and you're the one that actually runs back to make sure all your children are safe. There were so many more women who perished in natural disasters than males. This is World Bank findings, so I think we can rely on some issues around natural disasters and climate. But there again lies this whole thing about how can we empower ourselves in cases of emergency and urgency, that we can actually protect ourselves and the people who are important to us. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Cynthia, for her in-depth and interesting sharing. She has covered quite a lot. If I have to summarize it, I will take another 2 days maybe. Okay, but the key point she brought in, the first thing she brought in was that she would like to see more male to be present when these topics are discussed. Okay, so there will be a variety of views and also an understanding and awareness by the men themselves about the women's issue. I think that's a very, very valid point. There's a lot of things today I'm learning that I've never heard before. Okay. Okay, the second thing is about the culture of speaking up. That is something we especially Malaysians, we have a bit of feudal mentality whereby we tend to respect the man. Having sat in many senior management meetings, we tend to favor the women especially in JLCs, tend to favor the man to speak. And when the man speaks, the woman just keep quiet unless they are called to ask their opinions. And especially if the man is very domineering, he will have the whole floor. In some of the meetings I've sat in, and I see the only person speak is the males. And hardly the woman comes in, you know. And the same thing happened in Japan as well, where a senior manager was, by herself, was arranging the drinks. And there was like junior management and executive in the same table. But just because she's a woman, she feels her responsibility to arrange and get the food organized. Okay. Okay, the other thing she said touched about is gender equality and women's rights and corruption. Okay, that's a very, very big topic. Okay, that's very interesting as well. And she also mentioned about the confidentiality clause, which indirectly prevents people from sharing on if they want to bring up any issues out because they feel curtailed by these clauses. And finally, she mentioned about what the project they have in Indonesia, which is very interesting, something we should also embark on. Maybe we should also have one for the male as well. Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Cynthia, for the very in-depth and interesting sharing. Okay, we will have more discussion on it later, I'm sure.